Good evening, parents and carers, community members, and maybe even some Year 7 pupils joining us this evening. I hope you are all well. And before I introduce a number of fantastic staff we have in Forest, I just want to say that we're not expecting any technical difficulties, but please do bear with us if we encounter any this evening. Before I introduce our fantastic speakers this evening, who obviously I'm biased because they're members of our community, I'd just like to remind you that we have our last webinar on Thursday, the 20th of March. This is for the Lent series, which I don't know where the time has gone, and that's actually going to be delivered by Waltham Forest Prevent Team on understanding violent extremism online. So again, a very different topic to what we're hearing from today. But as I said in the past, these webinars are really to educate us, inform us as a community on a variety of topics. And I'll also shortly be sharing in the end of week bulletin, the Trinity webinar series, which we're really excited about in terms of the diverse range of speakers we have. Now, you're going to hear from a number of speakers this evening, a lot of them who you will know and your children will recognise if they're joining this evening. And I must say it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to work alongside this team daily. They're the true experts in their area. And I know that you're going to get so much out of this evening's webinar that you can refer back to and support your children with in preparing for revision and exams, which will all be part of our lives as they grow through Forest. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our head of lower school, Mr. Sloan.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Milton. Welcome, Year 7 parents, carers, and hopefully some Year 7 pupils as well. The purpose of tonight is, of course, to give you as much as we can in the way of tips and helpful information about how to revise for our end of year examination period, which will be coming up in that first week after half term in the Trinity term, Trinity 2 as we call it. So, without further ado, why are we putting on this event, this webinar this evening? Well, the purpose is to give you some really practical advice about how to manage your time, both as pupils, but also as parents and carers in terms of managing expectations and what we would hope to see from your pupils, your obviously your children, in terms of how to revise for probably their first set of exams, certainly the first since sitting the 11 plus assessments. So lots of people have a big role to play. Of course, relatives, family, friends will be there to obviously encourage our pupils, to give them advice, to look over them, to make sure they're doing the right thing and be that kind of sounding board. And we recognise that all of our pupils need a support team. They need a support network around them to help them navigate what can be quite a stressful period. And we want to try and take as much of that stress out of this as possible. So we know that our pupils will have us as teachers. They've got their pastoral support team, their tutor, their head of house, and of course myself as head of lower school. They've got their friends. Now, my advice always to Year 7 pupils is if your friends try to tell you that they're not revising or they haven't got any work to do, they are most likely not being honest, okay? They will be definitely working, they will be revising, they might just not be telling you all about it. So do take what your friends say, possibly with a bit of a pinch of salt. You've of course got your parents and carers who will be sounding boards for you to help obviously with any concerns you have, to support you all the way, to help you with your timetable, make sure you know what you're doing. And of course your wider extended family, all there to help you through this process. And once you build up those techniques, those exam techniques, you've been through the exam window for the first time, I think a lot of the kind of sting is taken out of it in terms of any worries, fears, anxiety, and you can face, hopefully, the exam period with confidence, which is really what we want you to do. So, what is the purpose of the internal examination for our lower school pupils? Well, part of it is, of course, exam readiness, gearing our pupils up for what it is like to be part of an exam week across multiple different subjects, obviously timed and in exam conditions. It's really, really important that our students are familiar with expectations in exam week of what they look like, not just in terms of revision, but actually their conduct in the exam rooms, gearing them up really importantly, to build on these stages heading towards GCSE. So exam technique, but also conduct and expectations within, obviously, the classroom and the exam environment. Of course, the exam is just going to be one snapshot in that subject, just like our CDAs are. They're one snapshot in that academic journey that you've taken this year. Okay, so they're not the be all and the end all, and that's really, really important. Of course, they're markers for us to measure progress, and that is important for us to capture data and pick out any gaps in your learning or any areas, of course, for improvement, but they are not the absolute be all and end all. This year has been about learning across many different ways, learning different techniques, new topics, and we recognize that. And this exam, just like your CDAs, is just one snapshot. So if they don't go exactly as planned, don't worry too much. It's about the learning process. And really, what we'd like you to get out of the exam period is as much what you've learned from the process as that final examination result. Okay, did those revision techniques pay off, or do you need to work on them and try something else? Were there gaps in your knowledge that perhaps you weren't aware of? That's what we're looking for. And we really want you to get that meaningful feedback out of the exam process. That's more important to us than the percentage and grade on your exam paper at the end of the week. Okay, and I really want to be very clear in my messaging with our pupils about that. Moving on, sorry, to my next slide. It's also about embedding good habits. So for year 7 and year 8, it's really good as an opportunity to try out and experiment a little bit with different revision techniques. Everyone learns in different ways, and some techniques will work for some, but not for others. So it's really important to trial all the different type of revision techniques that Dr. Peters will go through shortly in the presentation, but also we'll go through with your tutor team when we get into exam readiness cycle next term. Okay, so there'll be lots of opportunities to try out 5 or 6 different methods of revision and find out what works for you. And you can see, of course, in that comedy picture at the bottom left of the slide, that less is more. You shouldn't need to be on your device. You shouldn't be distracted by multiple different mediums. You need to settle down into one thing and give it a go. Develop good study habits and study skills. Of course, what we also want to make clear is setting limits. Okay, now we recognize that you cannot possibly use that half-term holiday break before exam week as the only time for you to revise. In fact, we're not expecting that. We very deliberately have a 2-week exam readiness cycle built into the first half of next term to allow that slow and steady revision to already be taking place, where different subject teachers will be using lessons to familiarize yourself with exam skills, techniques, what the paper will look like, and what topics you can expect to be on it. Okay. They will also embed different revision strategies and techniques as part of those lessons and homework to familiarize yourself with what you need to do. So that revision process will be slow and steady across the first half of the Trinity term. What it is absolutely not is about setting you up to cram revision at half term. We're not expecting that at all. Okay. We recognize that you will want to build on some of your revision over half term, but we expect you to set reasonable limits. We're not expecting you to spend every hour of your half term in your bedroom revising. Okay, we want you to set manageable limits. You may wish to do a couple of hours today, a couple of the power hour technique, which you'll hear about later on, but we're certainly not expecting endless hours over half term revising. This is about slow and steady embedding habits across the first half of the term and building on those revision skills, not cramming at the last minute. And how, of course, parents and carers, can you support your children through this process? Well, it's really, really important to persistently, as it says, debunk myths about revision. Okay, you need to be true to yourselves as pupils about what's working for you. There's no point coming up and spending hours on a really fancy revision timetable for half term that you waste lots of time on. That's not what it's all about. Okay, revision needs to be slow, steady, built in, as we will do as subject teachers across the Trinity term, and having those expectations with your children over half term, that it's not about endless hours here. It's not about cramming. It's just about an hour or two a day to build on what they've been doing across that summer term to put them in a good place ahead of those exams starting. Okay. Always ask questions which assume they've revised. Try to avoid questions that are based on judgments. Okay. How have you revised geography today? How do you feel it's going? What could you teach me about what you've done? Okay. Don't be that kind of helicopter parent who's over them every second. What are you doing? I've seen you haven't touched your maths book yet. You want to be as supportive as possible. Don't unload your own perhaps tensions, worries, anxiety onto your children. Okay. Let us worry and deal with all of that side. Ask them questions built around assuming they have done it and working on that. Avoid big statements that can lead to those judgments. Have you revised for Latin today? Show me what you've done, and be supportive. You have to give them a little bit of trust and independence. That's really, really important. And finally, avoid telling them what to revise and what you think and when you think they should be revising. Okay? Their subject teachers would have signposted them with exam topic lists as to what they should be doing. They would have given them their expertise and what they're expecting from them. So give them that little bit of trust that they are doing it. And as I say, ask them questions, but from a supportive lens. And that's definitely the most constructive way to support your child through this process. I'm now delighted to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Peters, who's going to talk you a little bit more through the sort of academic side and learning strategies, starting with the exam readiness cycle. Thank you.
Hi, good evening all. So Mr. Sloan's already touched upon that we have this dedicated exam readiness cycle, which comes up at the end of the first half of the Trinity term. So during that 2-week window, students will engage in lessons where they're predominantly revision. All homework set during that 2-week period will also be revision activities. And I share this message with your child's tutors this evening, that if that is not the case, it's really important that your children let us know, and then we can follow that up. If that isn't the case, that those tasks aren't purely revision. Okay? Because we really want to encourage that slow, steady revision that Mr. Sloan alluded to. Why do we think exam readiness is important? Well, lots of studies have shown that those students who have really good academic outcomes at the end of year 13 tend to have really good, strong, long-term memory resources in lots of different areas. And that happens through working quite deliberately to build up those long-term memory resources. That isn't to say what we're saying is students need to spend hours and hours revising. And I'm sure many of you will want an answer to the question, well, how long should they spend revising? I am quite deliberately not going to answer that question. Every child needs to establish how they are going to revise and what they're going to revise, because their learning is individual. And lots of the specialists that are going to talk this evening will show examples of the skills and success criteria that will be necessary for your child to demonstrate in the end of term exam. And they will be shared during the exam readiness cycle, what we call a revision tracker, where they will be expected to identify their relative areas of strength and development against those criteria. And it's important those areas that are for development are where they focus their time. And therefore, for some students, they will need to spend a lot longer revising certain subjects than others. And therefore, I can't accurately put a number to it. Okay, so I won't. I mentioned already, we want to displace this idea of deliberate practice. So many of you will be familiar with a sporting context for this, whereby if you want to get better, my sport is fencing. If I want to get better at fencing, and particularly if I want to get better at my defense in fencing, I will set out tasks to practice parrying exercises with a sword. It's the same idea here. You have a particular deficiency in an area of, for argument's sake, let's say physics, and from that perspective, you identify what that is, and then you dedicate time to work on that particular skill. So if we pick a skill from physics, maybe it's drawing a graph. You spend time practicing drawing graphs, and that's going to help you get better at that. It's the same idea with deliberate practice. And we're equipping your students during tutor times, as well as their lesson times, to perfect those skills. And indeed, part of the meeting we had as a section this evening with tutors was to equip them with tools on specific learning strategies. And there are 6 key ones which are shown on this slide, and I'm not going to talk through more. You will hear more from our subject specialists about key ones for use in particular areas. But these will be shared with your children later this week. They will have a dedicated personal development time this week where their tutor will go through one of these skills. During the exam readiness, they will revisit the others. And there are resources that we share with them in a revision booklet, which they'll have access to during the exam readiness cycle, where they will get more information and tools to practice using these skills in given areas. Okay. And now I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Nightingale, Head of English, to talk specifically about strategies which will help your child achieve a great outcome in the end of year English exam.
Thanks, Dr. Peters. Good evening, everybody. The most common thing to hear students say about English at exam time is exactly what you see on your screen right now. But you can't revise for English. It will not surprise you to hear me say this isn't true. It isn't true in year 7 and 8. It certainly won't be true by the time they hit their GCSEs. So I would really appreciate your help in debunking this myth with them. Now, it is true that it is less easy, less instantly rewarding to revise for English than for some other subjects. There are no lists of vocabulary like in languages, formulae like in the sciences. But what that means is that the gains are more incremental, and the work habits they get into now will really strongly inform their future English studies. Slide, please. Thank you. This is the key message. The exam is only testing what the students have been doing all year. Obvious question. What have they been doing all year? Slide, please. Thank you. All of this, effectively learning to become more sensitive readers of texts and more effective users of language to communicate and to analyse. Slide, please. They're going to be given a passage from the novel they've been studying, and which novel that is will depend on which class they are in. Ask them, what's your novel? Are you enjoying it? There'll then be a really simple essay question. Something like, what methods are used to present Professor Snape in this extract and elsewhere in the text? They can draw from the passage for quotations and for details, but they will need to use their wider knowledge of the novel to answer it fully. Just to disappoint you, nobody has actually been studying Harry Potter. It's just an example. All of this stuff they will practice in class. Slide, please. Thank you. This is what they will have been given. You don't need to worry about reading this, but they will. Slide, please. Thank you. So, back to our question. How do you revise for English? Well, there's the obvious stuff. Reread your novel. Go back over your old work, the practices you've done, and look at your targets. If every target all year has told you to check your punctuation, probably that's something you should be looking at. If, having done that, your child realizes actually they don't know how to use commas or semicolons or dashes, ask the teacher. It is what we are here for. And if your child is reluctant to do that, you can tell them I said so. Similarly, if they look back through their book and think, I don't know how to improve, I don't know what I need to be working on, ask your teacher. Your teacher does know and will be delighted to tell you. Next up, practice. Open the novel at a random page. Use that as your extract. Choose a character. Ask yourself, how does the author present the character? Do it with all your books, whatever you're reading, not just your exam text. So those are the easy wins. The real one, though, and the one that I want to talk about tonight, feels much less like productive work. And we often find students much less willing to do it, particularly as the exams approach, as time starts to feel a bit pinched. That one is, of course, slide please, reading. I say to students every single year in all year groups, if you read 15, 20 minutes a day, I promise you at least 1 grade higher in IGCSE English. And they never really believe me, because after one day's reading, you don't feel any cleverer. You don't feel like you've learned anything. You feel like you've just wasted 20 minutes you could have spent doing some actual learning. But the thing is, every day for 6 months, for a year, for the 4 years until they hit GCSEs, that's cumulative. You become more au fait with the way professionals use language, use metaphor, structure their sentences. Your vocabulary broadens without your noticing it. And your cultural capital expands, which makes you both better at English and makes you enjoy your life more. What should they be reading? Well, anything, really. A novel, non-fiction, autobiographies are often popular, particularly with children who think they don't like reading. A decent newspaper. Quality journalism on the internet is fine. I've just told all of my year 11s that between now and their exam, they should be reading a good quality newspaper every single day. But don't let your students be seduced into imagining that rants on Tumblr or on Reddit are valuable. Some are, but that really depends on the quality of the author, and that is really hard to manage when they're staring at a screen. The key at this age is that they should enjoy it, and that reading shouldn't just become another chore that they have to do. There'll be time for that later, like doing your daily workout or eating broccoli. Sometimes, even if you're not enjoying it, reading is something you should do just because it's good for you. At the end of this webinar, when the details get sent out, there will be a reading list in the pack. Go to the library, go to the bookshop, choose some books, get your child to talk to their English teacher about what they should be reading, get them to talk to our librarians who are amazing and have read everything on the planet. Find something you want to read and read it. So for this one, sorry, Dr. Phillips, my advice is actually not to focus on the year 7 exams. Your child should revise. They should do the easy wins because they'll make them feel good, and because getting a grade that reflects how hard they've worked will make them feel good. It will be really rewarding. But what they actually need to be doing now is setting up the habits that will make them good at English in the long haul, not just now. And please don't ever let them tell you that you cannot revise for English. Thank you. I think I'm passing over now to Mr. Jeffrey.
Hi, everybody. My name's Sean Jeffrey. I'm the head of maths. And if we could move to the next slide. So to begin with, I'm going to give just sort of 3 tips for maths revision. The first of those is to practice answering questions. One of the things that I often see pupils try to do is we ask them to revise in class for a test that they have coming up, and they might try and read their maths book. And this will not help with that revision process. To get better at maths, to revise for maths, you need to do maths. If we could have the next slide. But it's important that the questions that pupils are attempting and the problems that pupils are solving are in areas where they are not sure. So it's really, really important that it's focused on things that they're not sure about. But this is obviously very hard. I've suggested that they answer questions on things that they can't do. And so if we go to the next slide, my third tip is that this is what those notes that I often see pupils trying to read, this is what they are for. Okay, they are to support you to answer questions that you're not sure about. And obviously we are very lucky in maths to have lots of tutorial videos as well, which can explain things in real time. Could we have the next slide? We're very lucky in maths to have an online platform for this practice work, and I would describe it as sort of a one-stop shop for maths revision for the upcoming end-of-year exams. The entire syllabus for Year 7 is available in not just so in video form, but also with practice questions available as well. So if we could have the next slide. So if you log in, if a child logs in, they will all know their logins. It's just their Microsoft account. And click on that button that was on the previous page, you will be able to see down the left-hand side the topics that were learned in Michaelmas 1, the topics that were learned in Michaelmas 2. If you click on one of those topics on the left-hand side, you will then be taken to another page which gives you videos, and it gives practice questions as well. And yep, next slide. So another thing to talk about is the revision cycle. So with this, the way that this cycle works, as you can see here, is the top part there is about identifying topics. Pupils have been doing their CDA just last week, and after each CDA that pupils have completed this year, they have received a list of topics where they have struggled. So this is their sort of go-to point for this next stage. Find the things that they're not sure about. Remember that we're looking to try and revise topics that we're not sure about. And then do that supported practice. Practice answering questions with support available in the form of exercise books or using a YouTube video. But then it's this third step that sometimes pupils can forget to do, which is that at some point that support needs to be removed. So pupils need to practice answering questions without having a previous example to look at. They need to practice answering problems without any support at all. And then at that point, if they are confidently solving problems at that point, that topic can be crossed off the list. If they're still struggling a little bit, it stays on the list, and then the cycle continues. If we could have the next slide. Final thing that I just would like to talk about is the importance of interleave in maths. So revision and kind of answering questions requires effortful thought to be impactful. Pupils need to think about what they're doing. And it can be very easy for pupils to just answer the same question over and over again. And this really stops them thinking. They develop little shortcuts that perhaps are even harmful to their learning. So if we could go to the next slide. So here is an example revision sequence. You can see here each day is sort of like a little study session, studying. So on Monday, 3 different topics. And then on the Wednesday, perhaps ratio, that's quite a large topic, lots of different sort of ways that we can kind of, and lots of problems that we can solve with ratio. And then on that Friday, you can see that we're then revisiting topics again. So expanding brackets on Monday and then expanding brackets on Friday. There's that kind of spaced practice. And again, it's all kind of mixed in together. If we could go to the next slide. Now, on this slide here, as I mentioned earlier on Dr. Frost, here is a bad example revision sequence. So on the, it might be tricky for you to see, but on the behind the start practice picture, there is lots of different questions, and this is on the topic of ratio. And when pupils are selecting topics that they can answer, this pupil here has selected just a single question. They've then gone to practice by pressing the button in that top right, the blue button on the right. And then when they have done that, they've decided to choose a fixed number of questions, which is 10. Now, the problem with this revision sequence is that they're only practicing a single thing. They're only practicing that single thing, and they would be repeating that same thing over and over again. And as we just mentioned a moment ago, that leads to sometimes even some harmful little shortcuts that can cause problems when broader problems are then involved. If we could go to the next slide. So here is an example of a good revision sequence on Dr. Frost. So you can see on that left-hand side, there are 3 different topic sort of question types that have been selected. On the right-hand side, you can see that there was another topic that was selected before that point. So on the left-hand side, you've got the ratio. Then on that right-hand side, there are also other questions in this practice session that the pupil is about to do. And then when they've clicked practice, there is an opportunity to, instead of choosing a fixed number of questions, the pupil can click accuracy required to finish. And then there is the option to choose with interleaving. So that just allows pupils to mix up, to jumble up the questions. And as we say, it means that they're not answering the exact same question over and over and over again. And I believe that was my last slide. Oh, no, one more. And then, so yeah, finally, just the end of year exam, just some details about this. It's a 50-minute exam. It's a non-calculator paper. And the revision list is the same as the topics listed in the core section on Dr. Frost, the one that I mentioned earlier. Pupils will also receive a copy of the revision list, but it is effectively the same as the topic list that is listed on our online platform. Okay, and I'm handing you over to Mrs. Jamutis.
Hello, good evening. So I'm here to talk to you about the science exam in Year 7 and also a little bit about how to revise for it. So we're all here to help you help your children and help your children revise for the exams, because we know that sometimes children can be quite a scary experience. We've had Year 7s come to us and literally say, I don't know how to revise this, I just don't know what to do. So in order to help with that, we've kind of devised several plans and strategies to help along the way. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight are 4 things: what I need to revise, and so what do I need to revise, so a revision list, how to schedule my revision, I'll give you some tips of strategies to use, and then how you can be sure that you make progress. And I'm going to talk to you about the exam as well. So thanks. In terms of what I need to revise, if you, as students or parents, you can go to the pupil SharePoint. If you click on, you can see on the screen there, you click on Junior Science, you then click on Year 7, and it will take you to these. If you scroll down, it takes you to, or you click on the end of year exam, see there, Year 7 EOY exam. And then there's these really, really helpful folders that you can look at of different things you can try to help you along with your revision. The bottom one circled there is Year 7 end of year science exam revision list. And so that's your first port of call, because that's the list of everything you need to revise. Slide, please. So when you click on your revision list, it looks a bit like this, and this does look, I think, a bit packed full for Year 7. So I would focus on the left-hand column, and the left-hand column is your revision list. So you can see, if you can see there, there's properties of matter, particle model, change of state, animal and plant cells. That's your revision list. But then as you go further and further to the right of the page, these are the success criteria of each topic. So it'll just get in more detail. So it starts off, I can understand one thing. So for example, if you're looking at animal and plant cells, I can identify an animal cell or I can identify a plant cell. It becomes more multi-structural, where you can then, more than one thing. So you know several things in that topic. So you might be able to draw and label your cell. You might be able to describe the organelles. And then finally, it gets even more complex, where you can make links, you can make comparisons between different types of cell, you can list things and order things. It's more relational. And so as you go across to the right, things get more complicated, and your learning is deeper. So you're testing your learning as you go to the right of the page. My suggestion is that your child highlights these in red, amber and green, depending on how confident they feel, and then revise the topics that they feel less confident in. Okay, slide please. And so that's what you need to revise. So you'll be clicking on that, you'll see your revision list, you know what to revise, you can maybe highlight the things you need that you're not sure about. And then in terms of scheduling revision, so your child will be shared, this will be shared centrally, and Dr. Peters has already talked about this a little bit, in that you get a revision tracker where this will be shared with your child. So on the left hand side will be all of the topics that I just mentioned, and then your child can color their topic red, amber and green depending on how confident they feel. And then they can revise and they can continue revise. There's lots of repeats, and they can date it as well. So that it helps them kind of organize themselves a lot better. Slide, please. And so that's moving on now to, so we've looked at what to revise, how to schedule myself. And then a lot of, like I said before, some students come up to us and talk to us about, oh, I don't know how to revise, I don't know what to actually do. So we thought really hard, and we came up with some really good strategies. So I'm going to show you those now. So the first one is probably, I think, one of the best ideas. It's called a power hour for your revision. Because it's year 7, we've cut it down to half an hour, just because it's probably a bit much to expect them to revise for 1 hour for one topic. So within that half hour, you have the first section is the review there, as you see over the right in blue. So this should be roughly 10 minutes where they'll be given to them a BBC bite-sized page, a textbook page to read, a video maybe to click on and watch. So they'll spend 10 minutes reviewing the topic, recapping their memory. And the next 15 minutes is practice. So that's the dark blue section at the bottom. So this section should take around 15 minutes. And this is where they do the actual active part of their revision. They are then applying what they've learned in the review, answering some multiple choice questions, maybe some exam questions will be in there. And then finally, the most important part is the check part, where they'll spend 5 to 10 minutes. We'll give them the mark schemes, and they go back and mark their own work. This is really important. They need to correct any mistakes, and then learn from those mistakes, go back and review their understanding if they got it wrong. That's actually really powerful. That's where the powerful part of the learning comes in. Okay, so that's what the power hour revision looks like. Here's where to find them. So on your junior science SharePoint page, you've clicked on one of those folders I showed you earlier was the power half hour. And then you'll see there on the right hand side, end of year revision 1 particle model. For every single topic, there's one of these. So if you see there, there's the power hour pack, but there's also the answers as well. So they're all there for them. So if you click on one of them, if I have a slide, please. It should look like this. So when you open it up, it looks like this. They will be given hard copies of these as well. So so not to worry, but actually it's quite handy to have them online because you can click on the links. So they look like this. You can see there the topics at the top, and then there's questions at the end. If I can have the slide, please, I can think it's, yeah, so it looks like this close up. So if you see, there's the title of the topic on the top, and then those success criteria that I was talking about. As you move to the right, it gets more complex, it gets more deeper learning and higher level, and more more kind of explaining things, comparing things, suggesting things. And then there's the review there, and you can see it says read the BBC bite-sized page. They click on that, it goes straight to the page. It's got the textbook page and a video for them to watch. That should take 10 minutes. It's a guidance of 10 minutes there. And if I can have the slide, please. And then the 15 minutes part comes in next. This is where they've got a table to fill in here where they're describing properties. And if I can have the slide, please. Yeah, so that's what it looks like. But then the last part of this, actually, how I can use my revision to make progress, it actually ties up with the check part of the power half hour, because like I said before, this is the powerful part, because the student gets to mark their own work and use the mark scheme to make corrections, and that's really, really powerful, because that's how they're making progress, because they've got it wrong. They go back and correct their words, they correct their work, and that's where the learning comes in that part, really, more than anything else. They can go back over the review as well then. So as I said, that's there for all topics in science, but it's not for everyone. Not everyone might want to do that, and actually some children might have got through the whole lot of them and want to still revise, and there are so many different things that you can do to use your revision actively. So actively means you are sort of drawing the information, retrieving the information from your memory, rather than passively reading and taking notes. So for example, once you've checked you've got things right, you've got it right, you can then use your notes. You can do things like draw mind maps, glossaries, diagrams, and practice drawing graphs and tables. Teaching it to someone else is very, very popular and very, very useful, and very a successful way of learning is to teach to other people. And you can ask your teachers, because there are lots and lots of ways, because different topics can lend themselves really well for different revision strategies, and lots of different students have used lots of different strategies. Yeah, so slide, please. Another thing is that on the SharePoint page, in that little box of, I told you there was these helpful little folders, one of them really helpfully holds all of your child's progress quizzes. And so throughout year 7 and 8, during your topics, halfway through topics, you will have the children have formative assessments, and these are little quizzes that are on forms. So all of those are held in the end of year revision folder, so you can open those up and practice them at any time. So if I can have a slide, please. Yeah, so you can practice those, and also online you can always use, we have Sentry Tech for some children like that, for revision, with lots of videos and practice questions on, and the textbooks are available online on Active Learn. Slide, please. So I am now finished talking about revision. I'm going to talk about what to expect in the actual science test, because everyone wants to know what's in the test. But what I can tell you is what the test looks like. So there'll be testing the science content knowledge. So understanding and being able to put definitions, explaining what words mean, labeling diagrams, for example. Then there's also application of knowledge. So you've revised this topic, but now you need to be able to apply what you've learned, maybe to something different. So you might have learned about a particular experiment, but in the exam you might be faced with a completely different experiment, and that's fine. But you don't need to panic. You just need to apply what you know on that topic and to this new situation. And finally, every science exam needs to assess. You can identify variables, write a method, draw tables and graphs. All of these things are really, really good to revise because they come up in all three sciences. They come up in GCSE and they come up in A-level. They're always there, so you're going to need that knowledge. Slide, please. Yeah, really good tips for understanding how to be good at exams in general, actually. And this is we're still teaching year 11 for GCSE, and we're still teaching them for A-level. It's really important that they understand how to read the question in the exam. So understand what identify means, what describe means, and what explain means, because they mean different things. If the question is asking you to describe something, it's really asking you to say what you see. And if the question is asking you to explain something, it's asking you to say why it looks like that. And so look, yes, it's little tips like that. So yeah, I would just say good luck, and all your teachers are there to help you. Thank you very much. I'll pass you on to Humanities.
Good evening, I'm Miss Mackie and I'm the head of RS and Philosophy. So as is the case with all learning, effective revision requires students to regularly reflect on the following 3 questions. Where am I now? Where do I want to be? And how do I bridge that gap? Hopefully in the next 5 minutes, those 3 areas will be covered in relation to revision in the humanities subjects. Next slide, please. Some initial questions for students to think about are, what do I need to know for the exam? What do I already know? And what do I need to focus on? Next slide, please. To answer these, it's important to know what the exam will look like. Throughout the year, students will have sat a number of end-of-topic tests in their subjects. In RS, the end-of-year exams have been designed in the same style and format as these end-of-topic tests, so that students will already be fairly familiar with them. On the screen now, you can see a Year 7 practice exam, which is saved on the RS intranet pages. You can see that there are a mixture of questions. Some are short key term questions, some are explanation questions, and there are some longer PEAL-based questions as well. Students should bear this in mind when they complete their revision, as they want the strategies that they use to support the types of questions that they will get. As well as knowing the format of the paper, students need to know the content of the paper. Next slide, please. Before May half term, students will be issued with exam trackers, as mentioned by Dr. Peters, that list the content that they need to know for each subject. On the screen now, you can see the history checklist, which lists the topic area and then more specific content covered within each. There is then a column in which students can rag rate their understanding, something that they should regularly update to keep track of the progress they have made. Next slide, please. To help students to then assess their knowledge and to start committing the content to their long-term memory, a good first step is to add in a 3rd column and use it to do a brain dump of everything they already know. They should do this without their notes, and it doesn't need to be neat or in full sentences. They just need to get down what they can remember. Once they've done this, they should then go through their notes and make corrections in a different colour. On the example shown here, you can see where the student has forgotten things and made a mistake. Students should then edit their RAG highlighting based on how they got on. This is an exercise that students can repeat throughout the revision process, and hopefully the amount of coloured pen will reduce as they go along and they won't be forgetting the same things. Next slide, please. Another tool that students can use to commit content to their long-term memories is flashcards. But it's important to remember that the point of flashcards is not to cram lots of information onto a small piece of card, but they should contain precise summaries which they can test themselves on. Or they should have a question on one side and then an answer on the back. For example, they might include dates in history, key terms in RS, or diagrams in geography. Another mistake many students make with flashcards and revision in general is that they spend all of their time creating the resources and then don't actually test themselves. Making the flashcards is just step 1. The whole point of them is that they are tools to help students to test themselves. To do this, I would recommend the lightness system. This means having different piles of cards, some that you look at each day, some that you look at every few days, and some that you only look at once a week. If students get an answer wrong, they should put it in the pile of cards that they look at most frequently, and vice versa. If they get it right, they can put it in the pile that they look at less. This is a manual way of doing what many online flashcard apps do. They have algorithms built into them that means students are shown the cards that they get wrong more frequently. Apps such as Quizlet are popular with students and allow them to make electronic flashcards, which they can then test themselves on when sat on a bus, for example. Next slide, please. Finally, students may want to create mind maps looking at key questions within a topic. They can use a checklist to help them with this. Here is an example from history, which uses words and pictures to utilise dual coding and support memory building. As with the brain dump mentioned earlier, students may want to try recreating their mind maps from memory and then adding in anything they forget. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect or neat, as that's not the best use of their time. Next slide, please. As well as focusing on knowledge acquisition for different topics, it's also useful to focus on the skills needed for each subject. On the slide here, you can see the key skills developed in RS and a RAG rating of how confident the student feels on each skill. If students aren't sure how they're doing, they can look through previous tests or feedback they have received. Next slide. Once they've identified skills to work on, they can then think about strategies to help. I've already explained about using flashcards for key terms, but on the screen you can see other strategies. For example, if they're struggling with elaboration and explaining concepts, they can teach it to someone else. Or if they run out of time in tests, they can do timed practice. But in RS and history, Peel paragraphs are an important area of focus. To develop their ability to use Peel, they should do deliberate practice. To help students to come up with questions, they should refer back to the checklist. As you can see here, each learning intention has a command word: describe, evaluate, explain. If they see evaluate in RS, that means that it is the sort of question that they could be asked to give their opinion on, for which they would need to use Peel. Therefore, this student might want to do a Peel paragraph on whether a life of luxury leads to happiness. Here you can see an answer, and then to check they've included all elements, they can go through and highlight each part of Peel. This is particularly helpful if they struggle with one part of Peel in particular. For example, if they're not incorporating examples or linking back to the question, the colours make it very obvious. If students are still unsure, they should look at model answers shared with students in lessons. To summarise, make revision resources, complete regular testing, and then apply that knowledge to practice questions. Thank you for listening, and I'm now going to pass over to Dr. Gray.
Sorry, Dr. Gray, you're muted.
Let's start that again. Sorry, first of all, just say thank you, Ms. Mackey. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Gray. I'm the head of French. So first of all, let's have a look at what the language exams will look like. In short, there will be a speaking exam, a listening exam, a reading exam, and a writing exam. The important thing to note with the language exams is that the speaking exam and the listening exam both take place in the final week of Trinity 1. So that's the week commencing Monday, the 19th of May, which is the week before May half term. There will be a letter to follow with this information for all of the languages. We do organise the speaking and listening exam for that week before the full exams week, because these exams take place in normal lesson time and students will complete their speaking exams with their own class teacher. So just looking at those exams in a little bit more detail, the listening exam includes a variety of questions to assess the students' understanding of spoken French, Spanish or German. The question styles will be the same as those that they've seen in CDAs and in class practice throughout the year. This is the case for the reading exam as well, so there'll be no surprises, there'll be no question styles that they've not seen before. The speaking exam, which is something that sometimes causes some anxiety for students, but it really shouldn't. We do lots of practice in class and they'll be doing it with their class teacher that they've known all year. It shouldn't cause any anxiety at all. It's a very short assessment. It's really just a chance for them to show their language skills. So they'll be given a set of questions that they'll prepare in advance, and they'll be able to revise those and practice those at home if possible with your help, and with their peers as well. And then they'll have a 1 to 2 minute conversation with their subject teacher. The other element of that speaking exam will be a short reading out loud task, where they'll be given a very short paragraph and they'll need to read that aloud to their teacher with one practice through beforehand, and then they'll be marked for accuracy of their pronunciation. So this is really following like the model of the GCSE speaking exam for French, Spanish, and German. The reading comprehension exam and writing exam both take place in exams week in the same session. For Spanish, that may be brought forward to before the exams week, so there'll be a letter to confirm that. But in the reading exam, students will answer a series of comprehension questions, some of which will be multiple choice, some might be true or false questions, and some will be writing answers to comprehension questions, and in the style that they're seen all throughout the year. And finally, the writing part of the exam, students will be given a short prompt, and they'll need to write between 50 and 60 words, so really something very short around one of the topics that they've covered over the course of the year. And there'll also be some grammar questions on that part of the writing exam as well, so practicing the present tense, for example, or adjectival agreements. So let's look at the most effective active revision strategies. I say active because students are all really keen to use Quizlet, which I know Ms. Mackey has just sung the praises of, or particularly Blookit to practice vocabulary. Whilst these are two brilliant resources and can certainly be effective for revision and consolidation, I'd like to suggest some more active approaches rather than these, which can be more passive at times. So on that note, please do not be convinced by your children that listening to Spanish music, watching French TV series on Netflix, or switching their phone language, or even the commentary on FIFA to German will be a particularly useful approach, as fun as that might be. They're great things to do, they're great things to supplement their learning, but they're not going to be too helpful with exam preparation. I'm yet to see the episode of Lupin where he goes through the present tense verb endings whilst he's breaking into the Louvre, for example. So I know that this has been mentioned already tonight, the topic mind maps. So I think it's a really useful way for our students to approach that language revision. It's a great way to get all of the vocabulary down on one page, and then it sets the students up to complete a writing practice afterwards, or to attempt a reading comprehension question. On the next slide is a slightly different version of a mind map, which we've used in languages before. So students build out from more key or essential vocabulary in the center. So for example, just putting the topic name in the center, and then they move to more niche or detailed subtopic vocabulary as they move out to the outer quadrants. So the outer boxes can then be filled up with essay phrases or high-level vocabulary and expressions. There's an example on this slide here. This shows a revision of the school topic. So just to talk through it very briefly, the school subjects fill the top left quadrant. On the top right quadrant, there's opinion phrases, which the students then embellished and expanded. And then in the bottom left column, there's descriptions of what the school might be like. And on the bottom right, the facilities at school and some opinions on those. This is not the level that I'm expecting for a year 7 student, but it's a really good starting point just to use that model, perhaps. Another very popular way to revise vocabulary is with topic flashcards. As Ms. Mackey's mentioned, there's good ways of using flashcards and there's not so good ways of using flashcards. All modern foreign language teachers will agree that flashcards are a great way to revise, particularly for verbs or for structures or vocabulary. And they're definitely useful for speaking exam preparation as well. And I've seen them used very, very effectively. However, the best approach to this is removing those words or the vocabulary or the verbs from the pile once the students have mastered them. So then students can then focus on the ones which they keep forgetting and close those gaps. I've seen students in the past, in a similar way to Ms. Mackey was mentioned a moment ago, with a set of flashcards per topic, and then a separate set of flashcards that's got the words on that they frequently misspell or they frequently forget. That's a really great approach. That goes for Quizlet too, which I'll come to in just a moment. So these applications are fantastic. So there's some brilliant online resources. So Quizlet, Memrise, Languages Online, and the Language Gym. In MFL, we would probably say that Quizlet and Language Gym are the best options here, and all the students should already have a login to the Language Gym already. So just to return to Quizlet just for a moment, with vocabulary and verb revision using the flashcards on Quizlet, students can often be very, very proud, and rightly so, that they've consistently scored 90% on a Quizlet test. But if they then complete that test the next day and it's the same 10% that they're getting wrong each time, they're not closing those gaps. So the best strategy would really be for them to be active in this process and make a new Quizlet where they can build their own vocabulary just to practice the ones that they keep forgetting, just to close those gaps. Just to say, so as much as Quizlet and Blooket can be fantastic for revising for a language exam, it can't really compete with doing a practice question. So I'll just move through that slide. So using practice reading and listening questions is really the way to go. So a usual revision session would look like, would look like revising topic vocabulary first of all, and then maybe doing a practice question, checking the answers, and then maybe adding any unfamiliar words to their flashcard list. Or for a writing and speaking question, obviously, again, revising that vocabulary, looking over the key opinion phrases, the key structures, which are very transferable across topics, and then attempting that practice writing or practice speaking, potentially with you, the parents, or with a friend. Finally, as a last thing from me, we really recommend spacing out revision in languages little and often is the best approach. And there's really lots and lots of links and overlap across the topics. So if students can make those connections, it makes it all very transferable. And I think the best thing with language revision is the more you practice one skill, it impacts on all of the others. So students become more and more confident with the more they practice. Thank you very much for your time. I'll hand back to Mr. Slade.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gray. We've obviously come towards the end of the evening now. If there are any pertinent questions, Mrs. Milton will flag them to us. So I'll just give her a second to see if any questions come through. So it doesn't look like we have any questions, which is absolutely fine. If anyone watching either live now or at a later date does have any questions for myself or any of the team, then please do go through the usual channels of the school office, and one of us, of course, will reach out and hopefully be able to answer your query. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank all my colleagues for giving up their time. Really appreciated. And for parents and carers, thank you so much for coming on board, listening to the webinar, and I hope it's given you some food for thought for this evening. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again.